Lord God, may the words of my mouth and meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
Well, this morning we're doing something a little different. Some of you maybe saw that, well, we talked last week about doing a church hall. Do you know what a church hall is? Well, sort of like a town hall, only it's in church. So we'll be part message, part information, part question and answer. But it is my hope and prayer that we will all grow in the process. And then we'll take a break and have some great corned beef and cabbage. Sound good? All right. That's why you're really here. Isn't it funny when we have potluck, the seats are full? I don't know. Maybe we should just eat every week. Well, let me just give you a little background. So in February, our leaders met, and as we were discussing some of these topics, it occurred to us that one of the ways that we could improve just our general ministries is through better communication with one another as leaders and communication with our congregation. And so that was kind of how this idea was birthed. We thought, boy, wouldn't it have been great if everyone could have been here for these conversations? And so it really was laid on our hearts that we need to share information more freely with our group, which is all of you. And we are all one body. Amen?
Amen.
Particularly, too, because some of you have been with our church maybe a year or two or three, and maybe you weren't here many years ago when different things were decided. And this is, for those of you who may not be aware, our 20th year in ministry as the Boulder City United Methodist Church, which is pretty terrific. Some of you who were here when it was founded, if you were a founding member, just put your hand up so we can see there's a few of you here. We're very thankful for all of you. Amen. We're going to share the history of how the church was founded on September 29th. Put it in your date book, where we will have a formal 20th anniversary celebration, and at that time we'll give you the nitty-gritty of how we came to be. But what we wanted to focus on this morning was two specific areas that currently have been getting some attention. As I go visiting around and meeting with you folks, I hear questions about things, particularly with the new with General Conference vote. I've had a lot of questions about, well, what does that mean for us as a congregation? And so I thought it would be helpful, perhaps, to share with you our history and how we came to be a reconciling congregation, because that really does impact who we are as a group, who we are as individuals, and how we fit into the global United Methodist Church. And then the second topic that we wanted to speak about is to share about our property. Do all of you know that we own property 3+ acres? If you didn't, we do. And so we're going to hear how that came to be. Some of the folks who were there in that process when we purchased the property, and then we'll share some of the visions that we've had for it and what it looks like in the future. That's where these questions came in. I did get 3 questions, so if you have written down a question, I will ask, maybe Jerry could pick any questions up. We're taking questions of all kinds, but specifically around those 2 areas. But if you have another question about why does the pastor always wear the same darn pair of black shoes every Sunday, I can answer that question. It won't be interesting at all. But any and all questions are welcomed. So I think what we're doing this morning really fits into and should be couched in our mission and vision statement. So let me share first our mission statement. Many of you know this by heart. We seek, nurture, and send Christian disciples into the world. Right? That's a big job, but I know we're up for it. With 6,000 volunteer hours making mats, that's just one example of the amazing things that we do as we seek, nurture, and send people into the world. And then our vision statement. We, collectively, this community, is a place where all people can encounter and share the love of Jesus Christ through open hearts, open doors, open minds, and open doors. Okay? So I was appointed here in 2012, and I can tell you it was my first appointment as a minister. I was still in seminary, and knowing what I knew about Boulder City, my impression was that this church was conservative. Would you all agree that Boulder City, if you had to put it on a spectrum somewhere, conservative space? So JJ and I drove out to meet with the first group of folks, not exactly sure if it was SPRC, I think maybe it was SPRC, Linda could probably tell me, she was there. SPRC, okay. And so as everyone ran around and introduced themselves, I was surprised when our treasurer shared how he came to be a member of this church. He told the story of how he and his partner Gary had come into this church and had been welcomed and loved. I think they met the Foxes down over the hill, and they had, I won't tell you where they were, but they were having dinner or lunch or something, and they were immediately welcomed. And when Gary became ill, the church rallied around them. Now, I was shocked to find that an out gay man not only was a member of this conservative little church that I thought you were, but he was in leadership, right? And I thought, this is not my grandmother's Methodist church, which is a good thing. I realized I was joining with a church that was already inclusive, that was already welcoming everyone with the love of God. And in the following 2 years, I was blessed to be able to help our congregation put words to who and what we were. I was able to introduce the idea of becoming a member of the Reconciling Ministries Network. And over the next 2 years, we talked about it, we learned about it, we discussed it, and in October of 2014, we voted to become a member of the Reconciling Ministries Network. Now, there were some that didn't like that, and they just didn't want to be part of a gay church. I'm not sure what a gay church is, but I figure we're all happy and gay. That works for me. But they misunderstood what it meant to be a reconciling congregation. A reconciling church didn't mean that we all agreed, because Lord knows, with 2 people you're not going to agree, let alone 60, right? What it meant, though, is that we would agree to be specifically welcoming of everyone. Whether they are similar to us or different than us, we would share the love of God through Jesus Christ with everyone. And our church wrote the following statement that I think perfectly explains who we are as a church community. Our reconciling statement says this: Boulder City United Methodist Church, a connectional member of the United Methodist Church, embodies God's redeeming love and grace for all humanity and rejoices in the diversity of God's creation. Each and all of God's children, because of their uniqueness and diversity, bring the wonder of Christ's teachings of love and inclusiveness into our church family. We proclaim our steadfast love for all people, including people of all sexual orientation and gender identity or expression. And we invite everyone to be active members of our church family and to walk together as we witness God's grace and love through Jesus Christ. That is who we are, right? That is the essence of who this church is. And people, some have said, I don't want to be part of that. They misunderstand God's love. And others more flock to us because that is who we are. Any questions? I have one question. Thank you. Good question, thank you. So this question came in. It says, will BCUMC leave the United Methodist Church Network if the traditional plan is fully implemented? Great question. I'm sure many of you have been thinking, well, what's Next, I know we've talked some about it, but here's what I can tell you. In April, they will be choosing, the plan will go to the Judicial Council to deem whether it's constitutional or not. If it is deemed constitutional, and which means then we will all be required to follow it, then we as a church will have a decision to make. And it's not a decision we'll make quickly. We will take months, I would imagine, of discernment and prayer and listening for the voice of God to what our next plan is, our next space is. The traditional plan does require individual churches to sign and say, we will follow the traditional plan. We will be discriminatory against certain parts of the body. That's not something I'm comfortable signing. I would imagine that it would be likely this church would make that decision, particularly given who we are and what our DNA is. Each pastor would also be forced to sign a document saying the same thing. Today, I'm not willing to sign that. Again, there will be opportunities for us. It doesn't mean that churches will go away. This church will continue on because that's what God intends for us. Whether we have to change our name and take down the cross and flame or who knows. Now there's even been some questions, I don't know if you saw the article in the New York Times about improper voting. So, you know, only in churches do you find, no, it's everywhere, isn't it? People doing things that they shouldn't. I did see a blog where someone says, well, see, God spoke. You know, the traditional plan was approved, and I thought, well, God is still speaking because the Judicial Council very likely will strike it down. So, any questions about who we are as a reconciling congregation, our kind of uncertain future because of the traditional plan that was adopted? Here's what I'm guessing. There will be more questions. As different things happen, as you see different news things, my prayer for all of us is that, you know, we not be reactive to things. As new information is made known, that perhaps we can get together with some small groups as things progress so that we can talk about them. If you're concerned, know that the person sitting next to you is concerned. And I certainly don't want to pretend like it's not happening, but I also don't want to give a whole lot of focus because we have work to do. We have mats to make, and we have UMCOR to support, and lives to change. Valerie?
If next month it is deemed unconstitutional, what's the next step?
So if it is deemed unconstitutional, all of the unconstitutional parts will be removed. And if there's anything left, that was voted on, and it will go into play. It will go into practice on January 1 of 2020. Now, in May of 2020 is our next regularly scheduled general conference, and you can imagine this topic will be top of the list again. So the fight isn't over, right? We will continue to put forward what we believe is Christ's teachings, which is we love and welcome everyone, period. And yeah, Jerry?
I think it's important to mention the number of delegates and how close the vote was.
Absolutely.
Not anyone to assume it was an overwhelming vote.
No, it was, there were 800 and some total delegates. The difference was less than 100. So it was 57 to 48, I think, percent. Of course, if you take out the bishop's children who were flown in from Brussels to vote against the lesbians, as the report said, maybe it's, you know, closer. But I know they're aware of it. I know they're aware of other allegations as well of votes being purchased. So the sad thing for me is that our United Methodist Church dirty laundry is just being laid out for everyone to see, and it's important for me that we claim to be different. We being Boulder City United Methodist Church, and that was, for those of you who didn't see it, I wrote a letter to the editor, basically saying, yes, we are part of this global church. This is where we are as a community. JJ, you had a question?
Yeah, I don't know if everyone is aware of the really strong stance that the Western jurisdiction bishops, active and retired, made, disappointed about the vote that took place and the stand that they're taking to continue to support what was the one church plan or that type of a thing. So, and that the Western jurisdiction is kind of unique for America, let alone the world, in its
We are,
stance.
the Western jurisdiction, we are the progressive arm of our church, but we can't do without the leg and the head, right? Remember our body of Christ. So, and we have traditionally been the leaders in positive social change that needed to happen. So, slavery, women ordinations, and as well as other issues. So, there will always be a place for us. We just, as of right now, don't know. So please pray for our church and that we would hear God's calling, because God is calling us, right?
The Western jurisdiction is one of how many U.S. jurisdictions?
U.S. jurisdictions, maybe 4. I'd have to double check that, but I know they're kind of divided up. Maybe 3.
Sandy,
Yes.
one way to think of it is if you go Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, jog over to Arizona, and everything west of there,
Yeah.
including Hawaii and Alaska, is the Western jurisdiction. So it's a significant.
True. And we have heard from many other individual pastors, churches, and conferences who are wanting to be part of what the Western jurisdiction is. After the vote, someone representing the Western jurisdiction basically put it out to the world community. If you're not happy with this vote, join with us and we can work together to make that better. Yes.
Cindy, if the vote becomes negative and you, as you just stated, refuse to sign what they would make you sign, what will be your stand as our pastor in all of this?
I would envision that we'd all leave the house together. I don't know. There are some questions that really can't be answered.
Right now.
I trust that in that space where those of us who are basically, they force us out. If we won't agree, they say there's the door. That's their gracious exit plan is what they call it. Not really gracious.
Would that mean our Methodist church would?
At that point, we would see a split. And they have said part of the legislation, which may be deemed unconstitutional, part of the legislation says they get to keep the house, right? They get to keep the name, the logo, the organization, the money, right? And we would just be exited. So we take our bag of marbles and we don't know. Anything else? We have one more topic that we want to get to, and I know, lunch is waiting. So if you do have other questions, please don't hesitate to call me or text me or email me or any of our leaders, because this is important stuff. So, Brian Fox.